Right now, somewhere outside your home, along cracked sidewalks, old fences, abandoned corners of your yard, and places most people never bother looking, wild plants are growing quietly on their own. They survive heat, drought, frost, neglect, and years of being pulled out or sprayed down. Most people call them weeds. Most people never stop to wonder why they always come back. But long before supermarkets, modern medicine, and perfectly controlled gardens, some of these forgotten plants were trusted as food, medicine, and survival during the hardest seasons of life. They appeared when crops failed. They returned after winter. They healed wounds, restored strength, and fed generations of people who understood something the modern world slowly forgot. The strange part is, these plants never disappeared. They are still here, still growing, still waiting beneath our feet while the world rushes past them every single day. At the edge of an old American driveway, where the concrete had cracked after decades of winter frost and summer heat, tiny yellow flowers pushed themselves toward the morning sun. Most people would never stop to look at them. They would see weeds, imperfections, something to spray, pull, poison, and forget. But long before lawn companies convinced the modern world that every yard should look like a green carpet rolled out by a machine, those same flowers were once carried across oceans on purpose. Dandelion was not an accident of nature. It was a survival plant. European settlers brought dandelion seeds to North America because they understood something modern society forgot. A plant that returns every year without permission is more valuable than a crop that survives only with constant human intervention. Dandelions did not need prepared soil. They did not need fertilizers, irrigation systems, or gardening expertise passed down through expensive books and online tutorials. They simply appeared quietly, relentlessly. Like nature refusing to abandon humanity even after humanity abandoned nature. And the strange thing is this: almost every part of the plant is useful. The young leaves, harvested in early spring before the bitterness intensifies, contain extraordinary amounts of vitamin K, along with calcium, potassium, and beta-carotene. During long winters generations ago, when stored grains became stale and preserved meat dominated the diet, the first dandelion greens pushing through thawing soil were often the first fresh nutrients people had seen in months. Those greens were not decoration, they were renewal. The flowers themselves carried another purpose. Bright yellow heads scattered across a field were once gathered into teas, syrups, wines, and medicinal tonics. In old rural communities, children would fill baskets with them, while grandparents boiled water over cast-iron stoves, blackened by decades of smoke. There was something almost sacred about those moments. The understanding that healing did not always arrive from a pharmacy shelf. Sometimes it emerged silently from the cracks in the earth beneath your feet. But the deepest secret of dandelion hides underground. Its root drives deep into compacted earth, often more than a foot below the surface, pulling minerals upward from soil layers that ordinary vegetables can never reach. That root was roasted during difficult times as a coffee substitute, especially during wars and economic hardship, when imported goods disappeared. Farmers, laborers, widows, and struggling families drank roasted dandelion root. Not because it was trendy, but because survival taught them to value what the land freely offered. And maybe that is why modern culture learned to hate it. Because dandelion refuses dependency. A tomato plant can fail. Lettuce wilts under heat. Spinach bolts in dry weather. Entire gardens collapse without constant maintenance. But dandelion survives neglect, frost, poor soil, and repeated attempts to destroy it. It does not ask for permission to live. Every white seed head drifting through the wind carries hundreds of tiny parachutes designed to reclaim land over and over again, generation after generation. There is something strangely symbolic about that. Modern households spend hundreds of dollars every year trying to remove a plant that previous generations intentionally protected. We spray chemicals across our lawns to kill one of the most nutrient-dense plants growing naturally around us. And the deeper irony is that while grocery prices continue to rise and supply chains become more fragile, dandelion still appears every spring exactly as it always has, free, resilient, and impossible to fully erase. But as remarkable as dandelion is, it mostly solves one problem: vitamins and minerals. What comes next solves something entirely different. Because hidden low against the soil, growing where heat destroys almost everything else. Another wild plant carries a nutrient most people believe can only come from fish. By late August, the garden no longer looked alive. The tomato vines curled inward beneath the relentless heat, cucumber leaves sagged like tired hands, and lettuce had already become bitter weeks earlier. every afternoon felt like a battle against the sun itself. Gardeners dragged hoses across dry yards, watching water disappear almost instantly into thirsty soil. Entire vegetable beds that had looked beautiful in June now seemed fragile, exhausted, and close to collapse. But while nearly everything else struggled, another plant quietly spread across the ground, unnoticed, low to the soil. Thick green leaves, reddish stems stretching outward in every direction. Purslane did not fear the heat. In many ways, it seemed to welcome it. Most people pulled it immediately, assuming it was nothing more than a useless weed invading their carefully maintained garden. Yet hidden inside those small succulent-like leaves was one of the most surprising nutritional profiles in the natural world. Purslane contains remarkable amounts of omega-3 fatty acids, the same nutrient modern society spends billions of dollars trying to buy through fish oil capsules, fortified products, and expensive supplements. And the strange irony is that while people pay money searching for omega-3 inside plastic bottles, purslane grows freely between sidewalk cracks and neglected garden beds without asking for anything in return. Its real power, however, is not just nutrition, it is survival. Unlike delicate vegetables that depend on constant watering and protection, purslane thrives under pressure. Extreme heat, drought, poor soil, neglect conditions that destroy ordinary garden crops often make purslane grow even faster. Its leaves hold water naturally, allowing the plant to survive long after surrounding vegetation begins drying out. In some places, it almost looks immortal, creeping across the earth while everything taller and more carefully cultivated slowly fades around it. For centuries, people in parts of the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and North Africa understood this plant differently than modern culture does. In Turkey, Greece, Lebanon, and Egypt, purslane was not treated as a weed at all. Families intentionally gathered it during the hottest months of the year, mixing it into salads, yogurt dishes, soups, and olive oil meals. Farmers respected it because they knew one important truth. When summer became brutal, purslane was one of the few greens that could still be trusted. That reliability mattered, because survival has never belonged to the most delicate plants. It belongs to the plants that adapt, and perhaps that is why purslane feels so symbolic. Now, modern food systems often depend on perfect conditions: irrigation, transportation, refrigeration, fertilizers, fuel, and endless maintenance. But purslane depends only on sunlight, dry ground, and the ancient instinct to survive. The more people ignore it, the stronger it seems to become. Even its flavor carries something refreshing about it. Slightly lemony, crisp, cool against the tongue during intense summer heat. On old evenings in rural villages, people once harvested purslane, while cicadas echoed through dry air and golden sunlight settled across dusty fields. To them, this plant was not embarrassing. It was dependable. A food source that returned every year no matter how harsh the season became. And maybe that is the real difference between cultivated food and wild food. Cultivated plants often survive because humans protect them. Wild plants survive because nature designed them not to fail. But while purslane fills important nutritional gaps like omega-3 and minerals, the next forgotten plant becomes valuable for an entirely different reason. Because before spring fully arrives, before most gardens even wake up from winter, another quiet green appears exactly when human beings historically needed food the most. Winter itself was difficult, but the weeks after winter were often worse. Late February and early March brought a strange kind of exhaustion to older generations. Firewood stacks had grown smaller, stored vegetables were beginning to spoil, and preserved food had been eaten for so long that people craved something fresh without even realizing it. This was the hunger season, the quiet gap between surviving winter and growing new food again. And during that exact moment, while the ground still looked cold and lifeless, chickweed began appearing close to the soil. Tiny green leaves spread across garden edges and fence lines like soft carpets. Small white flowers shaped like stars opened beneath gray skies, while frost still lingered in the mornings. Most people today barely notice chickweed at all, but for earlier generations, its arrival carried meaning. It was one of the first signs that the earth was waking up again. That timing made it incredibly valuable. Long before grocery stores and refrigerated trucks existed, fresh greens after winter were not considered luxury foods. They were recovery. Chickweed provided vitamin C, calcium, magnesium, and iron during a season when the body had gone months without living plants. Families gathered it by hand and mixed it into soups, breads, stews, and early spring salads, because even a small amount of fresh green food could change how people felt after a long winter. Its taste matched its appearance: mild, soft, slightly grassy, almost comforting. Unlike stronger wild greens that required careful preparation, chickweed felt gentle, easy to eat, easy to trust. And maybe that gentleness is part of why the plant survived in human memory for so long, because chickweed never demanded attention. It simply arrived quietly when people needed it most. Another remarkable thing about chickweed is how little it asks for in return. No expensive soil, no seed packets, no watering schedules or gardening expertise. It grows naturally in disturbed ground, shaded corners, along pathways, beneath fences, and around the edges of gardens where most people stop paying attention. Once established, it returns year after year on its own, scattering seeds capable of surviving deep in the soil until the right conditions appear again. Nature remembers how to feed itself. Even when humans forget, there is something strangely hopeful about chickweed growing before spring fully begins. Before warmth truly returns, before certainty arrives. It feels almost like the earth sending proof that survival is still possible, even when the world looks empty. But chickweed is soft, quiet, gentle. The next forgotten plant is something entirely different, because the next weed growing beneath human footsteps was valued not only as food, but as one of nature's oldest forms of medicine. Along sidewalks, near playground fences, beside abandoned parking lots, and cracked curbs, where thousands of hurried footsteps pass every day, plantain grows quietly against the earth. Most people never notice it. Broad green leaves pressed flat to the soil, surviving in places that seem too compacted, too dry, and too neglected for life to thrive. But for generations, plantain was considered one of nature's simplest medicines. Long before pharmacies stood glowing beneath fluorescent lights, people crushed fresh plantain leaves between their fingers and placed them over insect bites, burns, splinters, blisters, and minor wounds. In rural communities, children learned early that relief could often be found growing a few feet away from where they were hurt. Families passed this knowledge down quietly, because the plant repeatedly proved useful. Modern research later confirmed that plantain contains soothing anti-inflammatory compounds, helping explain why it survived in folk medicine for centuries. There is something almost symbolic about it. A healing plant growing directly beneath human footsteps, while most people walk past without ever learning its name. And perhaps that is part of the larger story hidden inside so many forgotten weeds. The modern world became so focused on controlling nature that it stopped recognizing the small forms of help nature continued offering freely. But if plantain represents gentleness, the next plant feels entirely different. The first encounter with stinging nettle usually begins with pain. A careless hand brushes against the leaves during a morning walk or while clearing weeds from a garden bed, and suddenly the skin burns with hundreds of tiny stings. The sensation arrives instantly, sharp, hot, unforgettable. Children avoid the plant instinctively after touching it once. Gardeners curse it. Hikers step backward the moment they recognize those jagged leaves. The plant protects itself aggressively. Tiny hollow hairs covering the stems and leaves inject irritating chemicals into the skin, like microscopic needles. And yet, hidden behind that painful defense system is one of the most nutrient-dense wild plants growing in the natural world. Stinging nettle contains remarkable levels of iron, magnesium, calcium, potassium, and protein. Across Europe, families gathered nettles after long winters to make soups and teas that restored strength after months without fresh green. During difficult years, when food supplies ran low and diets became weak, nettles offered something powerful, nourishment arriving exactly when the body needed it most. And once boiled, the sting disappeared completely. What remained was dark green food rich enough to sustain entire communities through hard seasons. Steam rising from nettle soup inside cold kitchens once meant more than comfort. It meant survival lasting one more week, one more month, one more winter. It is a strange contradiction. One plant heals softly, the other heals harshly, but both survived in human history for the same reason. They worked. And beyond the nettles, standing tall in dry forgotten fields beneath the fading evening light, another ancient plant still waits like a torch from the old world. For centuries, survival rarely looked heroic. It looked like smoke rising from small kitchens before sunrise and tired hands gathering whatever the earth still offered after long winters and failed harvests. And among the plants that returned again and again, few carried a stranger reputation than stinging nettle. Once boiled, nettles lost their sting completely. What had felt painful moments earlier became nourishment. Across Europe, families cooked nettle soups during the final weeks of winter when bodies had grown weak from months without fresh greens, rich in iron, magnesium, calcium, and protein. Nettles helped restore strength during the hardest seasons of the year, and maybe that is why the plant survived in human memory for so long, because it reminded people that healing is not always gentle. Sometimes the same thing that hurts you can also save you. Beyond the nettles, standing tall above dry grass and forgotten roadsides, another ancient plant waited beneath the evening sun. Mullein looked almost like a torch from another world. Its silver-green leaves felt soft as velvet, while yellow flowers stretched upward against the fading sky. For generations, people brewed mullein into teas, and remedies believed to soothe coughing and calm irritated lungs during long, smoky winters. Even the plant itself seemed symbolic, soft enough to comfort, strong enough to survive drought and neglect, tall enough to remain standing after everything else had faded. And perhaps that image captures the deeper truth behind all 6 of these forgotten weeds. The dandelion breaking through concrete, the purslane thriving in heat, the chickweed arriving before spring, the plantain hidden beneath human footsteps, the nettle turning pain into nourishment, the mullein standing like a torch in abandoned fields, plants modern society learned to ignore, yet plants that continued returning year after year, quietly offering food, medicine, and survival to anyone willing to finally see them again.